Who's that, Vaughn?
Yep.
So welcome everybody. I'm Joe Tomaine. I'm a senior fellow at the Center for Applied Cybersecurity and a lecturer in law at the Malware School of Law. We're thankful that you're all here for our first CACR speaker series of 2021. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Vaughn to introduce our speakers for today. Vaughn Welch is the Associate Vice President for Information Security and the Executive Director for Cybersecurity Innovation and the Director of the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research. Vaughn?
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and welcome everybody. Happy New Year to this kicking off the spring semester of the CACR speaker series. This is the talk we like to do every year where we shift to a little bit more of an operational lens on cybersecurity and a little bit more about some of the goings on in cybersecurity here at Indiana University. And so I'm really pleased to be able to welcome two of our own speaking here today. So we're going to hear from Scott Orr, who's the operations manager of the OmniSOC project here at IU. You'll hear a little bit more about. And Scott has been with IU since 1988, when he started his career at IUPUI in what later became known as the Computer Network Center within the School of Engineering and Technology. He did a brief stint in the private sector and then came back to IUPUI in '97 to oversee all aspects of computer services within the computer science department, where he's also an adjunct faculty. And then a few years ago came over to the OmniSOC project. Joining him is going to be Keith Lehi, the University Information Security Officer, who started with IU back in '03 with research technologies, culminating on some work on the Polar Grid project, which is a really interesting project we should hear about some other time. And then he joined the security office in 2009, where he now leads the university security engineering team, which focuses on assisting with incident response investigations, running some university-wide security services, such as monitoring and providing general security consulting to IU. And so really pleased to have them here today, where they're going to talk about the OmniSOC student internship program and some of the challenges it went through last summer handling the pandemic. So with that, Scott, Keith, the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Vaughn. And thanks for the intro. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about the internship. But before doing so, I figured I want to spend a little bit of time. And actually, I got to get my slides to work properly now. I thought I had it. There we go. I wanted to talk a little bit about what OmniSOC is in general. For many of you may not be very familiar with us. So OmniSOC started as an idea when you had a meeting of a lot of the Big Ten CIOs, and they were discussing all the challenges that they had in security. And so the idea was kind of created of, what if we created a shared cybersecurity operations center, or SOC, that had a very much a research and higher ed focus to that. And what came of that was creating OmniSOC that would be hosted at IU, and some of the other Big Ten schools agreed to help pilot that. This kind of proposal was laid out in June of 2017. And by February of 2018, we had already started looking at various member datas and submitting tickets for possible incidents that we discovered. Now, to make that possible, we partnered with Elastic, which is for one thing, created a very large cluster software for creating a SIEM, a security incident and event management system. And this is a platform that my team particularly uses to look at all the data that we collect from our various members and organize it in a way and visualize it in various ways to help us identify and tease out from this huge volume of data incidents as they're occurring or have occurred. Now, currently, 3 years removed from that, we have several members still of the Big Ten a part of us. IU, in addition to that, we have Rutgers, Northwestern University, and the University of Nebraska. And also, OmniSOC is one of the partners in the Research SOC project as part of IU's contribution. And what the Research SOC is it's basically helping NSF-funded centers improve their security postures. So in our contribution to that, we collect their data as well and look for indications of security and help them protect themselves. And as part of the OmniSOC, this pilot program is including the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, the Gemini Observatory, and the Gauge Facility. Now, our mission from the very beginning was very clear and very bold. Our goal was to minimize the time from first awareness of a security threat anywhere to mitigation everywhere for our members. In simple, as we were looking at the data, anytime that we found a problem, we wanted to find it very quickly and let those members know, and also help all the other members protect themselves against those same problems, because there was always a chance that if an attack was hitting one member, it could be hitting many others as well. Now, to do that, here's how we laid out our environment. When we first brought on board a particular member campus, instead of dictating to them, we want you to install these softwares to detect and collect and to generate logs in your environment, we looked at what investment in security they had already made, and instead then collected logs from all of those various sources, and through a secure channel, have those brought into our Elastic clusters for our SIEM. Now, as part of that ingest process, what we then also did is normalize the data. If you've ever done a lot of log review, every different piece of software has different ways of referring to all the different fields. And so if you were to do that, it'd be very tedious to go from one data source to another, even though the data elements you're looking at are the same across all of those. So one of the first things we would do is normalize that to make our pivoting between one data source and another, say based upon source or destination IP, very seamless. We also, as we got that information and we're ingesting it, we started to enrich it, to give metadata that the security analysts and engineers could use to help their investigations. And some internal examples of that, that enrichment might be, what was the flow of the data? Was these traffic attempts coming into
file version?
Was coming into a particular member? Was it going out? Was it internal only sorts of traffic? And then likewise, some other enrichments that we did. We're partnered with the REN ISAC, and all of our members of OmniSOC, though, are also REN ISAC members. And so when we start getting our data in, we would cross-reference one of their threat databases, and if we found hits there, add tags to that so that we had other metadata that we could utilize to help us with our analysis. And so with that, my team that consists of security engineers and security analysts, we would start developing dashboards, visualizations, and also methods of focused searches and filters to kind of sort through all that data to help us find, through a number of different methods, indications that maybe something malicious was happening. Now, as part of that, since we are not in all of the member campuses, our visibility is sometimes a little limited. There are gaps in our visibility. So there were times sometimes that we would encounter things that look suspicious, but we didn't have enough information. And so we had a lot of communication conduits that we would go back to a specific member saying, hey, we're seeing this. We'd love to know if we could get X, Y, and Z piece of information. And so those members then could, if they had it available, to provide that to us to help us refine our investigations. And as we did find things that we thought bubbled up to the point that were reportable, we would make some recommendations on how we would mitigate those. We bundle that into a ticket, and then we would send it to the specific members so they could investigate further. And to kind of gauge how confident we were, we put a confidence level in each of those tickets, high, medium, or low, based upon how we felt or based on the data that we had. And so that, the members could use to kind of dictate how rapidly to respond to it, or, if it's more informational in nature. A part of this process too, we would also solicit feedback from the members of the tickets that we sent over. Were those tickets actionable? Was there in fact malicious activity going on related to that? Were they false positives? And particularly with false positives, we would then take that back into our environment to refine our processes so that we don't report those type of incidents in the future. And together, we have this sort of relationship going back and forth. In fact, we also provide a service where if a member campus were to encounter from another source an incident they want investigated, they could then reach out to us too, and that we could also participate a part of their investigations and help them out in any way that we could with the tools that we had available. Now, as I said in our mission statement, we wanted to be able to, detect anywhere, but help protect or mitigate everywhere. One of the things that we're working on right now is that as we find higher confidence indicators of compromise based upon our investigations, to put those out on a shared service that each of our members can then access and directly pull in real time those indicators that they could then plug into things like firewalls and intrusion detection systems, intrusion protection systems, to rapidly protect themselves, even if they've not yet been the target of attack of a particular other group. Now, when we're doing our investigations, we also do make use of a lot of other sorts of information out there, both open source and commercial threat intelligence, to help us refine our searches and gather the best amount of information we can when doing our investigations. Now, of course, one of the other services that we try to help our members with is giving eyes on glass 24/7, 365. And to help us do that, we partnered with another group that was based out of IU, the Global NOC. They already have a well-established team that have technicians around the clock looking at things. And so from our standpoint, as we report incidents across, no matter when it was, during the day, in the evenings, weekends, holidays, that communication would get out. And likewise, if the member campuses need to get a hold of us for involvement in an investigation, that they could send a messages that would go to this 24-hour NOC, and those folks would immediately know how to contact us to engage us anytime, day or night as necessary. Now, what it is that we look at in all that data we collect, some of you who may have done some analysis have probably seen this, this thing, the pyramid of pain. And so the data that we kind of focus on, the logs that we're collecting, we look at hash values for files, applications, anything that's sort of transmitted across the wire that we might be able to see. This might even include SSL certificates, so that if we know some certificates belong to malicious actors, that we can target on that. We look at IP addresses, both internally and externally, that we have flagged to be concerned about or need to do investigations concerning. Domain names is another one like that. We look at DNS queries too, particularly for ones associated with bad actors or automatically generated ones through domain generating algorithms to be able to respond to. And we also try to look at beyond the very common things. Are there metadata or artifacts in either the network communication or on the hosts themselves that can provide value? In the case of host traffic, that might be things like web browser user agents. And sometimes we'll see malicious user agents that we can trap on. If we're doing endpoint detections, we might be able to see what programs were run or what directories might have been created. In the case of Windows, what registries might be created, or network services that were open that were at odd times. So we could utilize that metadata as well as part of our investigations and gathering information. On the other side, we try to stay very much in tune with what's going on in the industry. And so, our team follows a lot of blogs, a lot of security researcher Twitter feeds, a lot of other reading material to keep abreast on a lot of attacks that are going on there, and also what various APTs, these advanced persistent threat folks, are doing on there, so that we can glean out what are the attacker tactics, techniques, and procedures they're using to attack our environments, and what tools are they using. And so from a top down, sort of having things that we can start having focus looks for, especially like right now, recently, I'm sure everybody here has heard of SolarWinds. As soon as that came out, we immediately started gleaming through to get IOCs and building out searches and filters and workflows to look through all of our members' data to see if we saw any indications of attacks like those. And so we kind of go from the top down, looking for information we get, and also from the bottom up with information we've already collected to do those sorts of analysis. Now, I'm just going to give you a really broad view of what some of that analysis sort of looks like in our group. On a daily basis, when we do our incident or threat hunting, we'll start as one focus, particularly our security analysts, on our NIS alerts, our network intrusion detection systems, and particularly the things that we focus upon are, do we see new alerts that we've not seen before, or at least have not encountered in the lifespan of all the data that we've collected. Now, to put that in perspective, we don't have infinite storage, so we limit the amount of data that we retain from 30 to all the way up in some cases to 60 days worth of data. So when I talk about new NIDS alerts, it's only over the course of that time frame. And so in those cases, when we see new NIDS alerts bubble up, it could be a situation where the network intrusion to systems have got new signatures. And so maybe that's in response to a new attack out there, and maybe we're seeing some evidence of that. Or in some cases, maybe those signatures have been around for a while, but there's a new tool or a new threat out there that's now trying to exploit those. And so we want to investigate those. We also will do recent alert spikes. Are we seeing huge volumes of certain alerts that are triggering, or groups of alerts from a common set of actors? And usually we'll do those spikes in periods of like 24 hours to maybe 72 hours to cover weekends or several days worth of data as well. Now, beyond that, what we also do is we look for what I'll say is known bad. So if we've had previous incidents that we have reported that have come back to be proven to be actionable, then we take those IOCs and we search continually across all of our members over time. Now, as those IOCs age, we start phasing some of those out, but we do want to look across all of our members for IOCs that may have been detected and proven actionable by one. And the other thing, again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, is we do keep abreast of any form of external threat intelligence that we can gather and build that into our searching as a known bad sort of environments. Beyond that, if you've ever worked with NIDS data, you know it can be just horribly, horribly noisy. A lot of hay to try to find those needles from. So one of the things we also try to make it a point of doing is start filtering out things that we either know to be good or have proven to be false positives. And of course, this is always an evolving process, and it requires us to know our environment. And in a lot of cases here, it comes in conversations with our various members when we talk about incidents. What are things that we reported that were actionable? What things that were false positives? What reasons were they false positives? So that we can modify our hunts to filter out that from the things that are interested. And of course, once we've done that filtering, even if it's something that wasn't necessarily triggered by, let's say, a NIDS alert, anything that remains might be interesting, and we want to take another look. Beyond that, we do try to go deeper as time permits, and especially with our security engineering team, this is something that they focus a little bit more on, a longer sort of analysis. One thing we do is we call a long tail analysis. And so especially like with that metadata we collect, as the example again, the browser user data. If people are using browsers like Chrome or Safari or Edge or Brave or any of those number ones, really common ones, we should see a lot of those browser user agents in all the traffic. We don't care about those. Those are legitimate softwares. But what about the other side? What about the ones that do not occur very often ago, or we see maybe from one machine or maybe a handful of machines? Those might be the indications of some malicious software that's gotten installed and maybe is calling home or reaching out to the attacker side, either trying to spoof to being a known browser or scripted. We want to take a look at those. So those really weird anomalies, those things that we don't see commonly in our environment, we'll want to investigate those. And anomalies in general that we want to look at. One of the big challenges that we have in the OmniSOC is when we're looking at things as a whole, it's kind of a big data problem. We collect a lot of information from all of our members. And so how can we glean out from all this information some interesting things that stand out? One thing that we do right now and have been doing for a while is we look for command and control beaconing, whether machines that might have been compromised internally in our organizations are periodically calling out in a kind of cyclic, periodic sort of fashion. And so we have software in there that we've modified to perform better in our environment that kind of looks for repeated communications to external sites out there within a certain variation of a set pattern. And we'll investigate those to see, are those going to malicious sites? Are they going to legitimate ones? And if legitimate ones, we then filter that noise in the future. One thing that's definitely on our radar, especially as new versions of Elastic is coming out, is doing more with machine learning. We did do a base project as a research group and CACR earlier, kind of looking at machine learning. But in general, we want to build a number of different workflows that will look at what normal traffic is in our various members and have machine learning tools for those type of workflows look for anything that maybe pop up out of the ordinary, so we can put another eyes on it to see if those are malicious activities or not. Now, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an idea on the volume of data we're doing out and how we're doing. Here is about a 6.5 month sort of snapshot of time. And actually, this was a snapshot taken from the COVID time. And the reason I kind of like to focus that is that once COVID hit, we all changed how we're operating. We all started working from home. Classes were involved online. And many institutions started doing what they called split, VPN split tunneling and such, that we saw the traffic that was truly destined for IU systems, but even if someone was tied to the VPN, external traffic going out to other internet things that were not tied to us, maybe we didn't see. So we saw a reduced volume of traffic, but even at that reduced level, across all of our members, we were seeing during this period of time 1.4 petabytes, which translated to, about 2.25 trillion events. And an event, basically, you can think about it, is one single log entry in any of our particular logs. Out of that, we submitted 129 tickets to members, 58 of which proved to be verifiably actionable. Now, that's not to say that the rest of them were not, malicious activity. Some were. 26 were proven to be false positives for various reasons, but there were some other ones. We had 4 that they could not verify. Whatever system that we had picked up on that was potentially doing malicious stuff was gone. Might have been a laptop. It was no longer in their environment. And we actually had a large number that we're still awaiting feedback from during that time. And of course, that was a real challenge that all of the various campus security teams were working on. Is everybody's home, these security teams would get reports from us. They would do their investigation. They would send feelers out to subunits within their entire campus organizations, and maybe didn't always get feedback back from those folks. So, while they're working their best to get that feedback, they weren't getting it, and so they couldn't feedback anything from us. And that was really kind of a nutshell on how OmniSOC operates and a little bit about our operation. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Keith to talk about our first internship.
Thanks for that overview, Scott. Next slide. So in 2018, Tom Davis, who was the founding member, or the founding director rather, of the OmniSOC, and who recently retired after a long career at IU. So hi, Tom, hope you're enjoying retirement. Tom reached out and started a discussion about considering whether the OmniSOC should engage in an internship program. We are hosted at an educational institution, and trying to help students would be a good mission for us. And Tom laid out sort of 3 goals that we would have. That would be enhancing the employability of interns. They would have something that they could potentially put on a resume. We could try to help them with improving academic outcomes. Maybe they could learn some things in an internship program that would help them in their studies. And then finally was crystallizing career choices. Students may get an idea of a career path that they may not have thought was possible or even been aware of by interacting with the OmniSOC staff as part of this process. Next slide. You may notice from those 3 things that they were all very, very focused on students. And that was something that we've kept in mind throughout this process. Internships should be about making sure that the participants, the interns, gain as much as they can out of this. However, there is an element of talent spotting, both for the member institutions who will be working with interns and the OmniSOC. Maybe you see a promising intern and you're able to get them into other positions in your university after the internship ended. Case in point, it's nice to see that one of the interns from the first round in 2019 is on the talk here, and Eric has been able to go on to do other great things at IU. Next slide. So we figured out what our mission, what our goals would be. The next thing we needed to figure out was who should apply. And so we're looking for students who are either undergraduates or graduates. You don't necessarily have to be in an IT program, an IT-oriented program, but you really do need to have some familiarity with information technology. And then finally, we had to have students who were members who were enrolled at one of the participating institutions. Again, that note on the IT background, we are looking for students who have broad backgrounds, and it doesn't, again, don't necessarily have to be in, say, computer science or something like that. I'm a person that has a liberal arts background. I think there's a fair amount of us that are older who came into this field not from technical programs, and we all bring different things to the table. Next slide. So we knew why we were doing this. We knew who we wanted in the process. The next thing that we sorted out was how we would select the interns. For the first round in 2019, the application process was really driven primarily by the member institutions. Each member institution was able to participate or had an opportunity to participate in that first round. Not all of them were able to. We ended up with 3 of the members at that time who participated. We knew we wanted to cap the program at a bit of a small start. So we were looking for 10 to 15 total interns. And those spots would be divided up among the participating institutions. The goal there with starting a little bit small was just making sure that we could give each of the interns enough attention and that this was something that would be manageable for us. Next one. So for IU, I was primarily involved with helping to do the selection, along with working with some campus staff at the Bloomington and IUPUI campuses who are heavily involved in internships and helping students find opportunities. We used kind of a traditional resume submission process. So they helped with a little bit of advertising, and then the interested parties could submit a resume. We would then do an actual review and selection process that we were able to do sort of with a quick little interview. So I was able to sit down. We had a small enough number of applicants that I could actually sit down and do a quick little 30-minute interview with them. Part of the idea that we had there was even if a student didn't get selected, you know, they would get a chance to go through an interview process, and getting experience and getting reps going through interviews is something that can be useful for anybody in their professional career. As luck would have it, we ended up with a small number of applicants, and we were able to get all of the applicants into the program that first year. So we knew what we were doing, we knew why we were doing it, and we had our pool of participants. Next slide. So the next thing we figured out was what would the structure of the program actually be? It was important that we kept in mind that this was a collaboration both between the OmniSOC and the membership institutions. It shouldn't have been something, we didn't want it to be something that the OmniSOC would have to run without support from the member institutions. And if they're participating, it was important that they be able to have input and help to shape the program. We also looked to and were able to get some support from commercial partners. Again, as Scott noted, you know, the OmniSOC has been working with Elastic's products since the founding, and Elastic was able to step up and help out with some financial support and also providing resources from some of their folks to help us with building out the program. Finally, it was important that we make sure that the interns were paid, that this would be a paid internship. We capped it at about 25 hours a week. That allowed us to deal with some requirements around student participation and also made sure that we would be able to give enough attention to the interns during the summer and still have member institution staff and OmniSOC staff be able to do all of the other things that they have going on. While summer is when university networks tend to get a little quieter, that's also a time when universities often like to take on projects. So we knew we needed to balance being able to make sure that the OmniSOC and member institution staff can do their daily operations and really be able to put the necessary time into helping the interns. Next slide. So we finally ended up with a program structure where there would be an 8-week program running through June and July. The first 4 weeks, students would be at the IU Bloomington campus. And then the second 4 weeks, they would go back to their home institutions. And then the last thing we wanted to make sure we had in the structure was a good balance of classroom activities, some teaching activities, as well as practical application so that students could get in and get their hands dirty with some of the technologies that we deal with. Next slide. So for the IU Bloomington phase, we would be putting the students up in the dorms unless the lucky students who already lived in Bloomington got to go home to their own beds. The Green Acres joke there is probably falling short on most of the crowd here. But the goal would be to have the interns over that 4-week phase in Bloomington. They would job shadow each of the major areas of the OmniSOC. So that would be the platform engineering team and see what it's like to build the infrastructure necessary to have a functioning SOC with the sort of high security requirements that you have working in a security operations center. As well, we wanted them to be able to work with the help desk, sort of see what working on the front lines of a SOC is like. And then last but certainly not least, working with Scott and his team to get a view of what it's like to do threat hunting and what it's like to engage in daily operations. We felt it would also be important to have some fundamental lectures that were built in there. There's some knowledge that we can't assume students will have that would help them be successful in moving through the internship. A key area for the example of that would be networking. You know, making sure that you have a solid understanding of TCP/IP and UDP, making sure that they understand some basics about common protocols like DNS and HTTP will be important for being able to do especially threat hunting, but also this is knowledge that is valuable in almost any field in IT. We live in a heavily networked world now, and practically everything that people do in information technology requires networking underneath. So we knew that we were hopeful that we'd be able to give them a little bit of knowledge that they would be able to use going forward. And that gets back to that idea of trying to help with academic outcomes. We also intended to be able to have some field trips as possible. One example was students being able to visit the Anthem Security Operations Center up here in Indianapolis. Anthem has a good, mature security operations center, and they were generous with their time to allow students to come in, get a tour, and talk to them a little bit and get another view of what a security operations center is all about. And then finally, we were hopeful that with that extra time outside of the 25 hours that the students would be able to explore Bloomington, but more importantly, hopefully be able to establish some relationships with their peers that were in the program. Hanging out in a dorm together, hopefully they would build friendships and build relationships, especially useful for undergrads who may not be able to often interact with their peers at other institutions. Next slide. So the second half of this would be the home institution phase. The students would go back to their to whatever membership institution they were part of. And that is where the member institution would be able to maybe put on some presentations from their local faculty or security staff. Or there may have been field trips that were possible because they were close to where that member institution was. But the most important part of that second phase was working toward completing an intern project. So we came up with a set of projects. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But the idea was that the students would really work closely with the security operations staff at their home institution and also work with sort of an informal project coordinator that was in the internship with us. For 2019, that was Kurt Seifert, who works on my team. I think Kurt was really useful for helping to give the students some direction, help them work through technical problems, and his participation in that second month, I think really helped to make this project a little bit more successful and meaningful and useful for the participants. Next slide. So the next thing that we were sorting out was we knew we wanted a project for that second month. And we wanted this to be something, first of all, that the OmniSOC and the member institutions could support. That sort of limits some areas of information technology. For instance, we couldn't take on a big software engineering project because software engineering really isn't a core competency for most of us. We can all write code to varying degrees, but we don't have a lot of experience in traditional development environments. And so we wouldn't be able to take on projects like that. It was also important that the project that we do be related to security operations center, be in that wheelhouse. That way we could build on the first month with this project. And then the last part was going back around to that first slide where I talked about the focus is on the students. It would be great if the OmniSOC or member institutions got some sort of tool or some sort of process out of this. That would be a bonus. And it does inform what we do for the projects a little bit. But again, you know, there's a tension between what we get out of it and what the interns get out of it. And any time that there's tension between those two, we always try to weight it more toward what is the benefit going to be to the interns and to the participants in the program. Next slide. So for 2019, what we ended up settling on was having the students work on building a honeypot at each of the member institutions. So there was some fundamental information that was provided in the first month. And when they went back for that second month, the goal would be that each group of students at the member institution would work on building up a honeypot. A honeypot is an idea where you expose a computer or a service generally to the open internet. It may be something as simple as an SSH server that you let people poke at. There's tons of rapid random scanning that goes on. What we can watch for is people who are maybe trying to brute force credentials, right? Trying to brute force access to that SSH server. And then that gives member institutions information on what are IP addresses that are trying to do brute forcing. They may be able to block those. They may simply watch them to see what they do. You can get information out of it about what are the credentials that are being tried, what are the user accounts that are being tried. So there's a lot of immediately useful information you can get out of deploying a honeypot, as well as longer term information that can help you, sort of get toward some of those things that Scott was pointing out that are more toward the top of the pyramid of pain, right? The TTPs are the hardest thing to figure out. Getting the sort of insight and intelligence that you can get out of a honeypot can help you get to the very top of that pyramid, which I am obligated to note is not a pyramid, it's a triangle. This is a joke between Scott and I. But so the idea would be, we would use the Stinger project is what we were basing this off of. This is a great project out of Duke University that is building up a containerized honeypot environment. In addition, we were looking to have the students try to do a few things that are useful, most useful at IU to deal with the scale of the network that we had. We understood that going through this process, the students may not be successful, but we also know that we're entering into this assuming that failed experiments are still good science. So even if the students weren't able to be successful, that might inform us that this is something that we really don't want to pursue, or we can learn things from that experiment. We ended up with, I think a fairly successful first project that first year in 2019. And then in 2020, we had started to discuss the idea of a malware detonation chamber project, which would be students building infrastructure to be able to run malicious software in a safe environment, in a sandbox, but be able to get indicators out of it. So getting things like files that are changed on the local file system, or network connections or network activity that can be useful for retroactive searches to find already compromised systems, as well as informing forward-looking monitoring to try to detect or possibly prevent future compromises. So we ended up at the end of 2019, next slide. We got through the process. We all felt like it was a pretty successful first round, but we did learn a lot of lessons. We learned that it was really important that we try to hit the ground running as early as possible to recruit. There's a lot of competition for students to enter into internships, and a lot of that recruiting happens very early in the fall semester. So we knew we needed to have our ducks in a row, so to speak, so that we could have the broadest pool of applicants possible. We also learned that students come into this process with variable levels of knowledge, and we wanted to be able to give them a chance to try to brush up on their skills a little bit before they came into the program. Keeping in mind the balance between they've got, they're just finishing up a spring semester in theory, and they've got a few weeks before they come to Bloomington. We needed to make sure that we kept what we gave them limited as much as possible. An example is making sure that they were up to snuff with Linux command line basics. That's another area that is something that's really useful going forward and really fundamental to a lot of what the OmniSOC does. Also, providing students with hardware. We found that students had variable quality laptops that were available when they brought their own, and we felt like if we were able to provide them with hardware, we could give them a good, secure environment and make sure it had all of the tools and all of the hardware necessary to do the work that we needed. Next slide. Finally, a couple more things we learned was looking at being able to use cloud services for any of the virtual lab machines that we needed. That would reduce the burden on the OmniSOC engineering team to build up infrastructure each year for the internship. And finally, the lesson that we walked away with was we really needed to focus as much as possible on practical application. There has to be a little bit of classroom teaching, but it seemed like the students enjoyed it most and were most engaged when we could give them a place to experiment and work and provide them with some guardrails and some guidance and support, and then let them explore and learn however it worked best for them. So there we were, end of 2019, we were starting our planning phase for 2020. We were all ready to have a super successful 2020, as I'm sure everybody was. And then we all know best laid plans of mice and men, yada, yada. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Scott.
Thanks, Keith. And as Keith mentioned, we got into, January of 2020. We were pretty excited with what we'd done in 2019. And we're starting the process of planning for the next year. And so in our initial plannings, we started meetings in January, working through February. We started laying it out. One of the new changes we had is that the UITS Research Technologies Group, they had a undergraduate research experience internship, and they wanted to join in with us. And so, the more the merrier. So we were very, very happy to add them to the mix. Is there a question? I'm sorry. And then one of the things they said from the lessons that we learned before is that, recruit early. And of course, we wanted to get the word out there to students, and, emails, postcards, comments from faculty and classes only go so far. How do you really want to reach students? You feed them. And so what we started to do is we, scheduled a series of pizza parties. I think we had 3 at the Bloomington campus. We had 1 at the IUPUI campus. We called our CyberStart parties. And so we got those there, we put food there, we got students in, and we started talking about what the internship looked like and kind of laid out what we did in 2019 and what we hope to do in 2020. Also, as part of that, we actually provided information to students to take SANS CyberStart Go challenge, or to do the SANS CyberStart Go challenges, which is a series of challenges. I think there were 12 initially, that were kind of like puzzles that had a cybersecurity sort of focus. And this is kind of a way for students to kind of gauge their interest. And for the ones who are doing really well, they could reach back out to us. And in our partnership with SANS, we had the opportunity to provide them students access and license vouchers to do the CyberStart games, which were like 240 more of these sorts of challenges that, for one, would be a good way to get them started thinking about security and different sort of applications. And another thing, as another tool that we could use as we were starting to evaluate applications to see who are the ones who are really strong and really were excited and good at doing this. Now, we already had success last time working with Elastic as far as curricular support for some of the talks that we had. In the time from that first internship to our planning process, Elastic purchased or obtained a company called Perched, which was basically an Elastic training and consulting and provider. And in fact, when we first spun up OmniSOC, we had used some of the Perched training to develop our own initial skill sets. And so we were very excited about a lot of the curriculum they had already developed and were ready to use, and see if part of Elastic contribution this year could be in utilizing some of these courses. And then lastly, we had started the process of looking at what cloud services could we use to support our labs as we were looking to expand and refine those. Of course, as Keith said, the best laid plans, we were rolling. We had a great working plan by the end of February. We were ready to roll this thing out full bore. And then COVID showed up and threw a huge wrench into our plans. And so as we went into March, we started having more questions and answers as far as how to figure out where to go with this. And some of the first questions we had, suppose we had to go virtual. Is it still valuable? And to answer that question, we really weren't the ones. And so we reached out to the CISOs at all the member institutions to kind of pose that question. And there was, great concern on their part because they didn't know. There was a lot of uncertainty with how COVID was going to affect things. If we were to go online, or at least partially online, how did that affect the application process? Was our original date still viable, or do we need to push this out a little bit? We started wondering, since the member campuses may have to help out a bit more as far as the labs and all that, did they have cloud services they could utilize, or were we still going to provide all of that services on there? And of course, the biggest monkey on our backs on this whole thing was that last one. All right, how long do we have to figure this whole thing out before we got to make a yay or nay sort of decision? Well, as things had it, the decision was really semi-made for us. At the very end of March, word came down from central administration that for summer programs, either cancel or go online completely. And so based upon all of our efforts in March and our discussions, we decided we think we're going to go ahead and go and do this online, but we were going to do it in some different ways. And the ways we've had for our whole new plan, for one, we pushed it back a little bit. Originally, the first phase of our internship happens in June with everybody at the IU Bloomington campus. Well, since we're going virtual only right now, we decided to do the whole thing in July. And instead of having, full immersion, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day sorts of immersion, or, matching up to that 25 hours, we just wanted to cut it down a little bit and treat it much more like a mini course, if you will. And so we cut it down to being 2 sessions per week and for 4 weeks total. So basically 8 sessions. And each of those sessions, instead of being a full day, was only going to be 2 to 3 hours in length. Now, because we were doing this, we had one real benefit to doing this. Instead of limiting our participation to 10 to 15 students, we just opened up the floodgates. We said, all right, we can handle up to 60. And so preferences were given to students across the member institutions who wanted to participate. If we had some slots beyond that, we also then shared with our member institution security staffs if there were particular sessions in this whole internship that maybe their staff would benefit from, they were welcome to. And in the very end, if there was anything left at the end of that, we opened it up to our own internal staff. If there were some folks who might also benefit from some of these courses, particularly like folks in our production group. And so we were ready to roll, and we laid out pretty much a functional schedule. So week 1, the first 2 sessions we had there was just getting the basics, getting everybody all the prerequisites in place so that they could go from there. And so the first session was going to be focusing on Linux command line tools and experience. And the second one, as Keith had sort of focused on, was very important for everybody to have that background, TCP/IP networking overview. And we also included packet carving exercises as part of that. So they could not only know what the traffic was, but if they captured it, they could actually dissect it themselves and see what was going on. Week 2, we focus on network monitoring, especially with a security focus. And in particular, we worked with, showing them how the Zeek infrastructure provided all of that. And if you take all that data and pump it into an Elastic like our environment, how you can utilize that to navigate all of these diverse logs for getting a big picture of what was going on. Week 3 was the real crown jewel. That was, basically 2 sessions worth of live threat hunting using Elastic. And so in that environment, they were using Elastic. There was a live block of data, both incident related and legitimate sort of traffic. And students were going to get a chance to kind of go through the type of hunting processes that my team would normally go through in a course of a normal day. Then to wrap it up, week 4, we had a lot of guest talks. The IU security staff put together a talk related to incident response process and forensic analysis and some lab work within that. And then the last day was sort of a set of mini talks that we collectively put together as we called Views from the CISO office. And so we had some of the member campus CISOs talk about what their experiences was, as well as security staff at various levels talking about their types of positions and the things that they were doing to give kind of the students then a well-rounded sort of view on security operations as an introduction. Now, of course, we were doing, a lot of this sort of stuff came with, utilizing that purge content. And actually 5 out of those 8 sessions really came from the Elastic group there. They did the Linux command line, they did the Zeek and Elastic introduction, as well as they had the whole threat exercise there. In fact, we were familiar with the threat hunting one because a number of us in OmniSOC and some of the IU staff had gone through this when we first rolled out our configuration. So we sort of knew what to expect. Now, the way we handled all of our sessions to include theirs is like this. We did Zoom as our main environment. We had not only the speaker talking, but we had 1 or more staff members who sort of monitored the chat and could then kind of interrupt periodically with various questions there. As there were examples, the instructors provided live screen captures of things as they were going and answering questions as we go. As we got into the exercises, Elastic in particular took advantage of the Strigo virtual lab environment, which was basically having a bunch of cloud workstations out there, Linux workstations, and through a web interface, gave the students full bash command line access to Linux. So if they were doing exercises that were Zeek focused, they could use all of the grep, sed, awk tools, everything that they had gotten experience from parsing those logs and looking for data. These machines, these virtual systems, had a public facing network IP address, and through the browser, students could connect to the Elastic instances running on there. And these machines were fully loaded, not only through the Elastic instance, but preloaded with log data in different formats for the students to do all of their work. Now, of course, the best way to get students involved in doing assignments instead of blowing them off or being focused on other things is to make it competitive. And so instead of just saying, all right, here, do these sort of steps and we'll come back to you in an hour, they had a competition. And they used the capture the flag sort of model for this with some open source software, and they did in the Jeopardy sort of model, is that there was a series of challenges. Each challenge had a number of subcomponents there. Each of those subcomponents had point values associated with them. And so in case you got stuck in any particular places, there were also hints available, which for a minor loss of points, you could get that to help you keep moving forward. And you could actually go on this software to a scoreboard to see how you're doing and how you're comparing with your competitors. And so, once you bring competition level, those juices start flowing. The students got very engaged into that process. Now, kind of collect a little bit of stats on how we did. As we're starting to analyze after the fact how this whole sessions went, we sort of looked at it, and we had pretty good attendance across the board, especially for the first 2.5 weeks. Particularly Rutgers really was very active early on, but we had good participation across all 3 of the campuses. Now, what we did notice was there was a drop off between the first session of hunting and the second. And I think what we were seeing here in our discussions is that you had some variation of folks who, had done a lot of prerequisite work, had a lot of skill sets, were picking up this material, and those who were struggling a little bit. And even though we were trying online to help those, I think a lot of folks kind of got a little discouraged and sort of faded away from some of that. And so, we had a little bit of drop off as we went into the second threat hunting session, but from there it stayed pretty steady for going into that last week where we had the incident response talk and the CISO and careers sort of talk theirs. Now, kind of globally looking at everything, we decided to give out certificates for folks who participated in at least 5 of the sessions. And we had 36 students who did go through at least 5 of those. 42% of those came out of Rutgers, 33 came out of Nebraska, and 25% came out of IU. Now, again, like we did after the first one, after we kind of let things settle down a little bit, we got back together and say, what did we learn from this environment here? And so some of the things that we did learn. First one is that we had to engage students early and often. We'd already learned to do our recruiting process early, but we learned, especially with an online process and a lot of students who were involved, that they needed a lot of continual information. Can I put this on my LinkedIn? What was the time commitments that were going on? We also in the first week discovered that we had a lot of, little minor communication things, or when students try to get into the Strigo environment. So we suggested, hey, can we meet once with everybody ahead of time just to kind of test everything that we got going on, make sure that the communication worked and get into the Strigo environment. And we thought it might be a good idea to treat this as a good meet and greet, to let students kind of introduce themselves and to break this up by member schools and even multiple ones for member schools. So, maybe Rutgers had 1, 2, or 3 sessions for their students, and the same thing for Nebraska, same thing for IU, same thing for Northwestern. Also, to keep students engaged during these talks, since they were virtual, do we, kind of do Zoom polls? And so to get interactive sort of interaction from them. And also, and we talked about skills all along, up front, can we do a skills assessment? And the real goal was to see where our skill sets are for different folks and to create breakout rooms that had a mix of skill sets with those students from individual institutions. So we might have a Rutgers breakout room that has 4 or 5 students, and they had various levels. And the goal is that with the various levels, they could maybe also teach each other. And likewise with these breakout rooms, and to use them a lot more during the exercises, is that the instructor as well as our staff could visit those rooms to answer questions or engage in those conversations. Going further, some other things, and to take that even a step further, with especially like the capture the flag exercise, and to minimize maybe some of that drop off, instead of doing it as individuals, let's do it as teams. Those breakout rooms we created, have them operate as a team. And so maybe you have everybody engaged and sticking around for that entire process. Also, to help us work with the students, both in the challenges and in the other exercises, is if our staff could get a much deeper advanced look into the Elastic curriculum and exercises so that we were well familiar with them beforehand and could answer those questions going forward. And then the last couple of things were just kind of make the experience stronger. I think when we left a lot of times for breaks, most everybody took off, they muted their mics and sort of went away and then came back. In this case, we decided we want to make it a real conscious point for the speaker, the staff to stay available with mics unmuted to answer questions. And even more so, come on much earlier, maybe an hour before the talk, and have kind of a social hour, open mic, talk about whatever people want to talk about. And I really have gotten a greater sense of the value of this going forward after our last internship, just because of our own sense. There's several groups whose webinars that I watch, for an example, and they call it pre-show banter. And it's just wonderful to be able to interact with the speakers and their team beforehand about either the topic or future things to build that sort of connection. And finally, the last thing, especially for the attendees who are with us for a while, swag is always great. We have member partners. If we can send them out, t-shirts or any other sorts of things, that is awesome. And that's kind of what we kind of come away with. This talk is very timely for us because we're now in the early stages of planning the 2021 internship. What questions do you have? Hopefully I left enough time for that.
Hey, I had a question real quick.
Pardon me?
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, this all sounds really great, actually. This is my second semester and I use cybersecurity program, and I, for one, do not actually come from the largest of technical backgrounds, but it sounds like this program really is for a lot of various different types of people. And I guess my question is how and when to apply.
Best I can say right now is stay tuned. We're just now starting to work out the details. And then once we start having those, we're going to use every single channel available to us to get the word out.
Awesome. Thank you.
And there was a question in the chat, 2 questions. How did you guys decide who could apply? And then also, is there any initiatives to include diverse candidates given the lack of diversity in this field?
I think the decision on who could apply was driven by a couple things. The need to restrict it to people who are, attending one of the member institutions is probably the biggest limiter. That was primarily driven by they need to be able to work with those member institutions for the second half of the project. So having someone who isn't able to be on the campus and attend, we felt like that might not have them as well included. There's also, they're being paid And so it starts to get more complicated if you're trying to pay people who are maybe out of your state. And so I think those were some of the things, but the biggest thing was just, will they be able to participate in the program? Diversity is certainly something that we continue to try to work on. You know, as Scott noted at the end of the 2020 seminar, we focused on trying to have several people who have more diverse backgrounds do some of those presentations and talk about their, you know, their career path into information security. As far as trying to, I think really getting at the diversity and trying to solve some of those or improve some of those outcomes, that's something that we can probably focus even more on, perhaps when we're able to get back to an in-person program, and see if there are some initiatives that we can do there. It might be reaching out to some groups that represent different communities and make sure that we're getting input from them. But as always, you know, if people have suggestions, we're always open to hear what people have in the way of ideas.
Well, let me step in here for. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Scott.
One thing we're very fortunate about too is one of the members of my team is very involved with IU's CWIT, the Women in Technology Society, and so she is very active in presenting and sharing. And so I know, you know, next time we do that, she's going to be very active in recruiting as well as part of this initiative.
Great. Well, listen, it's 1 o'clock now. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I want to say, first of all, thank you to Scott and Keith for taking time. If you guys have time and there's other questions, we could take a couple more off the record if people want to. I also want to alert people to our next event, which is February 25th with Professor Susan Landau from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you all for coming. And if our speakers have a few minutes and there's questions, people are certainly welcome to hang out for a few minutes. So thank you, everyone, Scott and Keith especially.